Hello and howdy everyone. Welcome to the series on my channel, Doodles and Discourse, where I talk about books, TV shows, and whatever else I feel like talking about while drawing related fan art. Last week, I covered the first half of a series by Tamara Pierce, The Song of the Lioness, where I discussed the first two books in the series in regards to how well the series is held up against modern sensibilities via their feminist and gender exploration themes. If you'd like to check that out, I'll link it down below, assuming that YouTube lets me link anything yet. At the end of that episode, I said that the front runners for discussion this week were the second half of that series or The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Then stuff happened. Specifically, one of my favorite authors announced that the new installment of her ongoing zombie apocalypse hope punk series, Cascadia, will be dropping in 2 weeks after being delayed well over a year due to the pandemic. So obviously, I have to divert all of my attention to that. If you've never heard of Sarah Lyons Fleming, she is an independent author who began publishing in 2013 with Until the End of the World. She's been publishing works within the same zombie apocalypse universe ever since. What makes her work stand out within the somewhat oversaturated zombie apocalypse genre is that while her books are aesthetically zombie books, they certainly feature quite a lot of The Walking Dead, they're not really genre fiction, they're literary fiction. Why does that matter? Well, it's all about managing expectations. My friend Elliot, from our shared channel, The Failure Files, once described genre fiction to me as football fiction. And while I think that oversimplifies it a bit, he has a point. Most genre fiction is expected to have a plot with some kind of football, a magic ring, a big bad to kill, a specific romantic partner to seduce, that is readily identifiable. Even in a genre book where the true goal of the piece is subtle, the end goal is often stated outright, though always not by the main character, within the first few chapters. The rest of the book and or series is then spent either carrying the football toward the resolution, passing it around, or chasing it. But the football is always there, requiring very little thought to determine its location. For example, The Hunger Games, where even though the first book is overtly about Katniss's specific struggle within the dystopian nightmare that is Panem, Gale brings up the idea of a full revolution within the first chapter, and it's not difficult to see going forward how that remains the football of the series. By comparison, literary fiction tends to feel much more loosey-goosey. The plots are often character-driven, concerned with the way that the characters' relationships and personality developments play out, than they are with whether or not a Dark Lord is defeated. Don't get me wrong, Dark Lords may feature, but if you go into a literary fiction book expecting the characters to focus purely on politics or the act of waging war, as opposed to the emotional weight of either, you'll probably walk away feeling disappointed. Which is a lot of words to tell you this. If you're looking for a zombie book that's about combating the zombie menace, you're better off looking elsewhere. If, however, you want a book about finding hope, community, and family within the heart of tragedy, welcome home. There are 3 series within the verse so far: Until the End of the World, The City, and Cascadia. Today, I'm going to limit myself to the first series so that each gets the attention it deserves. Please bear in mind that if you want to jump into this verse, you can technically start with any one of these series. They're written to be internally self-contained, though the second series, The City, does have a spoiler at the very end for the ending of Until the End of the World. Fleming's universe begins with Until the End of the World, a trilogy which encompasses 3 books: Until the End of the World, and After, and All the Stars in the Sky. There's also a novella between the first 2 books, So Long Lollipops, which I do consider required reading for the series, but I mean, if you want an incomplete picture, I guess you can skip it. You shouldn't, though. That all said, since the series title is such a mouthful, I'm going to call it the Cassie series from now on. As you probably just guessed, this book revolves around a singular protagonist, Cassie Forrest, an art teacher from Brooklyn who's just decided that her 2-year breakdown following the untimely deaths of both her parents has to end. She's been wallowing in her grief and depression for far too long and has allowed it to destroy nearly everything that was good in her life. First order of business is ending things with the absolute wanker, Peter, who she'd been dating as a rebound following the dissolution of her engagement to the love of her life, Adrian. But of course, before she can fulfill this goal, the strange sickness that's been sweeping the city for the past few days is revealed to be a zombie infection that is nearing its tipping point. Though Cassie and her friends are initially skeptical, after meeting some zombies on the street, they agree to head upstate together, to the cabin Cassie's parents left behind, which is conveniently filled with all their old prepper gear. Unfortunately, just as Cassie is thinking there's one good thing to come out of all of this mess, that the apocalypse is effectively breaking up with Peter for her, who should just so happen to show up at her apartment in time to hitch a ride? You guessed it, the wanker. So, what makes Peter a wanker? Well, he's a rich socialite with killer style and negative 9,000 emotional availability. Though their original meeting made Cassie suspect that he has more depth to him than he lets on, they bonded over their mutual grief at having lost loved ones to atrocious car accidents. He's kept her at arm's length ever since, only opening up in the moments that he believes she's too tired or too drunk to remember him, being honest about his emotions, or in the few times he sensed that she was about to leave him. His denial of the zombie apocalypse, insisting that it's just a weird flu, is the last straw. God, yeah, and these books came out in 2013. Which makes like his pandemic denial, oh god, it hits so differently now. Though she agrees to let him come along on their car trip, she finally dumps him, apocalypse be damned. The situation only goes downhill from there, particularly when a few weeks later at the cabin, their radio starts picking up broadcasts from a farm a few states away that has set itself up as a safe zone. And the leader of that farm, of course, is none other than her ex-fiancé, Adrian. Now, all of that sounds more like a romance novel than a zombie book, but still genre fiction, right? And yeah, there are elements of romance within this, though if you're thinking it's a love triangle, you're wrong. It really isn't. Most of the first book revolves around Cassie learning to forgive herself for the mistakes she made while grieving, learning to forgive Peter for the mistakes he made while he was grieving, and the pair of them finding a way to work together for the good of the group despite the hurt they've caused others and each other in the past. Along the way, they encounter obstacles which are typical of the zombie genre. Zombies, obviously, but also threats of military violence, getting their basic needs met when supply chains collapse, and even more violence from random, violent-minded people who use the apocalypse as an excuse to be their worst selves. By the way, there is a SA warning for the first and third books in the Cassie series. It's just a mention of SA in the first book, but the third book includes a brief assault scene that is overall well handled, but also very disturbing. Because of this, I'm going to give a full warning here in a minute, but it is spoiler heavy. There will be a spoiler tag on the screen. Just skip to the end of that section if you don't really care to hear it. So, here's what's up. In the first book, Until the End of the World, the group investigates a local Walmart for supplies. Inside, they find the bodies of two girls who were obviously assaulted before being killed. Later, they confront the local murder squad who were responsible. In the process, they also rescue an abducted child, Elizabeth, from the murder squad's clutches. Though it isn't gone into detail, the fact that the gang also assaulted and killed Elizabeth's mother is made clear. Then, in the third book, All the Stars in the Sky, a group of men ambush the party while they're camped in an RV on the side of the road, waiting for some of their people to come back from a supply run. The men discuss assaulting a teenage girl in the group, and Cassie offers herself up in the girl's stead. She's taken outside to be assaulted in private by one of the men, and begins passively allowing him to have his way, only to rally herself into fighting back. She kills the man just before the people on the supply run finally return, then helps them take out the rest of the goon squad. Afterward, she learns that despite her attempts at diverting the man's attention, the teenager was also assaulted while Cassie was outside. To be honest with y'all, though I've reread this entire series 3 or 4 times, I've skipped over this section in every subsequent read through because I cannot handle it. While the subject matter is treated seriously, that also makes it extremely triggering. Another issue for me is the way that Cassie gets out of it. While I am certain this was not intended, Cassie's bootstrapping her way out of being assaulted, and I mean that almost literally. She kills the man with her shoelaces, for Christ's sake. It has vibes to the tune of if someone is assaulted, it's because they weren't fighting back hard enough. It's pretty uncomfortable, is what I'm saying. But it's also skippable. While the assaults will be referenced through the rest of the book, those references are minimal and circumspect. Alright, spoilers over. The rest of the series stays with Cassie as her group is forced away from the cabin, moving first to Adrian's farm, then venturing further north as denser and denser mobs of the undead migrate around the Americas, driving the living toward colder, harsher environments where the undead will have an even more difficult time surviving than people. Along the way, Cassie loses more loved ones, each time learning new lessons about dealing with grief, how to feel it and move past it without letting it swallow all that she is. But I told you that these books were about hope, community, and found family, and they are. Ultimately, the Cassie series is about looking for light on the other side of darkness, of knowing that as bleak as things might seem right now, if you keep moving, keep trying, your situation will eventually improve. No one lives forever, of course, but for every person that Cassie loses, others are rescued. For every time they lose a home, another is gained. The world won't always be easy or perfect, but there will be moments of joy, connection, and love if you're willing to engage with them. In conjunction with this, one of the things that really stands out to me in all of Sarah's work is just how many regular people the characters meet. In zombie genre fiction, every stranger is suspicious. While they can sometimes turn out to be okay, most of the time the friendly stranger who offers you food is actually a cannibal or a cultist or both. But with this series, more often than not, they're just people. Not all hidden motives are deadly, but even then, most people are exactly what they seem: cautious and scared and trying to survive, but ultimately not there to just ruin anyone else's day, even if they can't afford to stop and help in that moment. One moment that really stands out to me from the Cassie series in particular is when Zeke and his motorcycle gang roll into a town where Cassie and her people are busy looting the Walmart. Though Cassie's group initially want to run, they quickly realize they've already been spotted, so they're really better off waiting for the group to approach. They already have their hands on their guns and are anticipating a fight, only to realize that, yeah, the caravan has a lot of motorcycles, but also a lot of RVs with regular families and kids inside. Because while this obviously was a motorcycle club, motorcyclists are just regular people. Zeke is a dentist. The groups exchange information, supplies, and then move on their separate ways. Now, eventually Zeke does come back. He plays a major role in the later half of the series, but in the context of just the first book, this is a one-off moment. Some big characters who carry vital information about the world to the main cast. I can't help but note, however, that in my opinion, lesser or more typical example of the zombie genre would have the gang seem suspicious throughout the whole encounter. Would have tried to make us believe that these people would be back, guns blazing, come nightfall, no matter how kindly they seemed during the day. And then they probably would, because don't you know that everyone is out to screw over as many people as they can? But that's not the world that Sarah writes, and that's so refreshing. Now that I've waxed poetic about all the good things, though, I do need to point out that Until the End of the World is Sarah's first book series, and her first book in general, so far as I've been able to tell. So obviously, there are issues. For instance, one of Cassie's best friends, Nellie, is a gay man who's a bit. Listen, as a queer woman, I can be a little judgmental when it comes to the way that, again, so far as I'm aware, straight writers write queer characters. A gay man choosing to spend the majority of his time hanging around his straight female best friend and constantly worrying about her love life is a little something. Stereotyped, maybe? I can offer plenty of Watsonian explanations for why this makes perfect sense in universe and why Nellie himself is a great character whom I love, and I do love him. But this was a choice that the author made. She chose to have him to be the only queer for miles in the first book, and then have exactly one gay guy show up toward the middle of the series, whom Nellie immediately hooks up with. And while the fact that they're possibly the last two gay men on Earth is lampshaded, and they are genuinely cute together, it still makes me feel away. Granted, I applaud her for choosing to write queer characters at all, since not bothering to try would have been the easier choice, and often is the choice that authors make, particularly in this genre. But still, if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, then you may want to skip to the Cascadia series instead. Sarah's work on this issue has improved quite a lot. It's not perfect still, mind, and I'll get to that in later videos, but she has notably improved, and it's really clear to me that she is actively working on it. So, there's that. Another thing I've seen brought up with Cassie's series is that some people have an issue with the way Cassie herself is written. Personally, I love Cassie. I think she's great. She's flawed in that she often holds grudges like a mofo and tends to think she knows better than everyone around her, but she's also very determined, loving, and generous with a great sense of humor. I have seen more than a few people call her childish and self obsessed, though, so I figured I'd mention that if you go into this series feeling like female characters should never make jokes about bodily functions or react in a way that isn't 100% reasonable at all times or ever prioritize their own well being over men's emotions, then you're probably not going to like Cassie. Oh, wait, hold on. Was that actually a positive again? Yeah, funny how that happens. But no, seriously, this series can be a bit like, I want to use a word here and I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on YouTube or not. God, I hate living in a dystopian hellhole. Uh, Fuck it, I'm just gonna say it. This series can be a little bit like prepper porn at times. While it does give lip service to not caring for or promoting the gun worshipping, racist, doomsday cultist type of preppers, it also tends to unironically worship Laura Ingalls Wilder and buys a bit too much into the idea that sustenance farming is easy. Within fiction, that's all fine, but I do wonder if the author doesn't push that element a little too hard sometimes. While there are other more in depth criticisms I could levy against the Cassie series, those criticisms actually span Sarah's work as a whole. Things like her commitment to saddling female characters with childcare, even if they don't initially want kids. The fact that all but one of her perspective characters so far have been white, or at least questionably white, despite the otherwise diverse cast, and the fact that all of her perspective characters have also been people who have pulled themselves up by the bootstraps into having loads of money before the apocalypse hit, even when their backgrounds don't really support it. Like, seriously, she goes to some truly absurd lengths to give these characters money and stability before everything falls apart, even when it's completely unnecessary to the plot or it doesn't entirely make sense. To draw an example from this book, Cassie and her friends all work for the same New York City nonprofit, And except for Penny, it seems like they all make enough money to have their own places with cash to burn, working at a non-profit. While some lip service is given to the fact that these are allegedly low paying jobs, there isn't any physical evidence of that. No one talks about struggling to make rent, or how at least Apocalypse canceled their student loans, or has a house that's messy and filled with cheap trash furniture because they spend more time working 3 jobs to pay their property taxes than they actually spend living there. The worst examples are from other books, though. There's an abused kid raised by a poor army vet who grew up to become a rich stockbroker. The neglected kid raised by a drug addict who became a rich marketing goddess. The other abused kid who became a small business owner who might not be rich, but who did well enough that he bought a huge house off the profits. The independent real estate agent who literally just stole her company for a mint. That all being said, I think I understand why this is from a purely genre perspective. These are, after all, apocalypse novels. Loss of stability is a thing in this genre, right? But while we're a long way away from a 4th series, since there's still at least one more book to go in Cascadia after this one releases, I'm really hoping we eventually get a lead character who genuinely starts the apocalypse with nothing. Bottom of the barrel nothing. Just for a change of pace. But here I am, going on about the verse as a whole rather than sticking to the Cassie series, as I said I would. So instead, let me tell you about the art. I decided to work things a little differently this time. You might have noticed that I cut out my warm-ups and setup process. I figured that sticking to the part people are more likely to care about was better, especially with this being a shorter video. But if you found those stages helpful to see, please let me know. Beyond that, I've also put markers on the different stages of the process to better explain what's happening on screen. What may be less obvious if you haven't read the books is that instead of illustrating a specific moment like I did for Alana, this time I tried to capture my favorite relationship dynamic from the first book. On the far left, we have Cassie herself before her Princess Leia bun phase, because honestly. And on the far right, Peter, still dressed in his NYC businessman persona. They're watching each other warily over the sleeping, protected body of their mutually adopted daughter, Elizabeth, aka Bits, as zombies close in outside. Despite the up and downs of their relationship, their shared commitment to this little girl, to keeping her safe, their agreement to watch each other's backs for her sake, if not their own, was such a source of joy. Watching that family dynamic grow and change over the course of the series and be handled with such maturity and respect was enthralling. If you'd like to check out this series or any of the other Sarah Lyons Fleming books, unfortunately, Amazon may be your best option. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and physical copies are printed on demand, again, through Amazon. That said, there are a handful of libraries which do have copies on the shelves, so as always, I'd suggest you check your local library first and ask if they accept book requests if they don't have it. You may also check worldcat.org to see if a library near you has it listed in their records. But this is where I'm going to leave off my fangirling for now. Next week, we should be moving on to the City series, unless Baldur's Gate 3 completely rots my brain in the meantime. I mean, it's possible. So for now, don't forget to ignore the like button and slap that subscribe button like it flirted with your mother. Why did I say that? Alright, bye-bye.